He learned the truth in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. The doctor spoke calmly, as if this were ordinary. The words did not land all at once. They came apart, piece by piece, and each piece stayed. By the time he understood what was being said, the future he had assumed was already gone. A child was waiting in a room down the hall, not crying, just sitting. There was no time to prepare. No one asked if he was ready. The question was never raised. He signed forms he barely read. He made calls that went unanswered. By the end of the night, he was responsible for a life that depended on him, and the person who had shared that responsibility was not coming back. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the danger. If this story resonates, consider subscribing. It helps the channel continue telling stories like this. He left the hospital after midnight, not because anyone rushed him, but because there was nothing else to do inside. The hallway lights stayed bright no matter the hour. They did not change for grief. They did not dim for shock. They stayed the same as he signed the last form and folded it without looking. The child walked beside him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to wander. Their shoes made a soft sound against the floor. It echoed more than it should have. He noticed that, and nothing else. Outside, the air was cool. The parking lot was half empty. A few cars sat with fogged windows, engines still warm. He unlocked his own without thinking. His hand shook once, then steadied. He opened the back door and waited. The child climbed in on their own. They had done this before. He watched carefully anyway. When the seatbelt clicked into place, the sound felt final. He stood there longer than needed, one hand resting on the doorframe, as if waiting for someone to say something important. No one did. He closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. The motion felt familiar. That almost made it worse. The drive home was quiet. Streetlights passed at regular intervals. Red lights turned green whether he was ready or not. He kept both hands on the wheel. The radio stayed off. He thought about turning it on just to break the silence, then didn't. The silence felt earned. At one stoplight, he looked in the mirror. The child was staring out the window, not crying, not sleeping, just watching the dark move past. He wanted to say something reassuring. He could not find the words without feeling false, so he said nothing. When they reached the apartment, he parked in his usual spot, third space from the stairs. He had always liked the predictability of that. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment. The quiet pressed in harder here without the hum of tires on asphalt. He got out first, opened the back door. The child stepped down and stood beside him, waiting. He locked the car. The sound echoed through the lot. Somewhere above them, a television flickered behind a window. Laughter leaked out, then stopped. They climbed the stairs slowly. He carried the small bag the nurse had given him. Inside were papers, a change of clothes, things meant to be helpful. The bag felt heavier than it should have. He kept switching hands. Inside the apartment, nothing had changed. Shoes by the door. A jacket on the back of the chair. A half-empty glass in the sink. The normal details lined up the way they always had. He felt a brief, sharp urge to leave everything exactly as it was, as if that might keep the rest of the night from being real. He set the bag on the counter. The child stood near the door, still wearing their jacket. He told them they could take it off. His voice sounded steady enough. The child nodded and did it without help. He turned on one light in the living room. The rest of the apartment stayed dark. He did not think about why. He just knew he did not want it all lit at once. He showed the child their room. The bed was already made. The stuffed animal sat where it always had, leaned slightly to one side. He pulled back the covers. The child climbed in without comment. He stood there, hands at his sides, unsure what came next. "Do you need anything?" he asked. The child shook their head. He waited another second, then another. When nothing else happened, he turned off the light and closed the door most of the way, leaving it open just enough. In his own room, he sat on the edge of the bed. He did not change his clothes. He did not lie down. The clock on the dresser read 1047. He watched the minutes move forward. The apartment made its usual night sounds. Pipes clicking, a distant door closing. Somewhere, someone walked across the ceiling above him. Life continued without adjustment. He thought about the morning, about school lunches and alarms and conversations he had never had alone. He did not plan. Planning felt dishonest this early. Instead, he stayed where he was, listening, holding still, aware that by the time the sun came up, there would be no one else to step in. The responsibility had already settled. It did not announce itself. It simply stayed. Before that night, mornings had followed a pattern he never questioned. He woke up 10 minutes before his alarm. He lay still, listening for movement in the apartment. If he heard footsteps, he stayed in bed. If he didn't, he got up and started the coffee. Most days, there were footsteps. The kitchen light came on first, then the sound of the kettle. The apartment filled slowly, not with noise, but with signs of use. A drawer opening, a cabinet closing too hard and then more gently the second time. Someone clearing their throat in the hallway. The child usually appeared last, hair uneven, socks mismatched. They moved through the kitchen without urgency. Already late, but not yet worried. Someone else handled that part. He focused on the things he was good at: packing lunches, checking bags, reminding without hovering. They sat at the small table together, but not always at the same time. Conversations overlapped instead of waiting their turn. Plans were exchanged quickly. Who would pick up? Who would stay late? What needed to be signed? None of it felt heavy then. It felt managed. He left the apartment at the same time every morning. He liked arriving early, when the building was quiet and the lights were still warming up. At work, people greeted him with nods instead of questions. They trusted him to keep things moving. He did. When problems came up, he listened, then made decisions. Not dramatic ones, practical ones. He believed most things could be solved that way, with enough attention and a steady hand. Evenings were less predictable, but still shared. Sometimes dinner was late. Sometimes it was simple. The child talked about school. Not much, but enough. He listened while clearing plates. Someone else asked the questions he didn't think to ask. There were nights when he stayed late at the office. Nights when he came home to a quiet apartment and leftovers wrapped carefully in foil. He never thought of that as absence. It was just how things balanced out. Weekends were easier. Groceries on Saturday. Laundry on Sunday. The child sat on the floor while the machine hummed, building something out of pieces that never stayed together for long. He watched from the doorway, present without being needed. He did not think of himself as distant. He thought of himself as reliable. There were signs later that he would recognize as warnings. Small moments he dismissed because nothing bad followed them at the time. A missed call. A conversation cut short because there was always another chance to finish it later. He lived inside that assumption that later was guaranteed. On the last ordinary morning, the coffee tasted burnt. He remembered that because it annoyed him. He drank it anyway. The child spilled cereal on the counter. Someone else cleaned it up while he grabbed his keys. At the door, he leaned down and reminded the child to bring their folder back from school. The child nodded without looking up. It felt routine enough to forget. He left before anyone else did. He remembers that too. At work, the day unfolded as expected. Meetings, emails, a small disagreement that he smoothed over without raising his voice. He left his phone on silent. He did not check it for hours. When he finally did, there were missed calls. More than one. He stepped into a quiet stairwell to listen to the message. He leaned against the wall while it played. His hand slid down the concrete until he was sitting on the steps. He stayed there longer than necessary, listening to the same message twice, then a third time, as if repetition might change the meaning. That was the moment the old pattern ended, not with a dramatic break, but with a pause that stretched too long to be ignored. He went back into the office and told his supervisor he needed to leave. He did not explain. He did not need to. The look he received was careful, concerned, already distant. The drive to the hospital blurred. He followed directions without remembering them. At one point, he missed a turn and did not correct it right away. He needed the extra minute to breathe. Everything that came after the hallway, the forms, the quiet belonged to a different life. But this one still lingered, close enough to feel, far enough to be unreachable. He would return to these memories later, searching for mistakes. That night, though, they stayed sealed off. He did not yet know how much weight the past would carry once it was no longer shared. For now, it remained what it had always been, a structure he had trusted without ever testing its strength. On Monday morning, he went back to work. He woke before the alarm began. The habit held even when everything else had shifted. He dressed quietly and stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter while the coffee brewed. He packed the child's lunch with more care than usual, lining things up as if order might transfer itself. The child watched him from the table. They did not speak. He asked if they were ready. They nodded. At the school drop-off, he walked them to the door instead of stopping at the curb. He signed in, even though it wasn't required. The teacher greeted him kindly. He answered with a nod that felt too formal. When the child went inside, they did not look back. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether to leave or wait. Eventually, he turned and walked away. At the office, things looked the same. Desks in neat rows, screens already glowing. Someone handed him a report without comment. Another asked a question he answered automatically. His voice sounded like it always had. He liked that. His role here had rules. Problems arrived with boundaries. Decisions had clear outcomes. When he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because he rarely spoke without purpose. He believed authority worked best that way, quiet, steady, earned over time. By mid-morning, he had settled into the rhythm. Emails cleared. A meeting ran long but stayed productive. He took notes, circled a few lines, and delegated follow-ups. No one questioned him. No one mentioned his absence the previous week. At lunch, he ate at his desk. He usually did. The sandwich tasted flat. He ate it anyway. In the afternoon, the school called. He stepped into the hallway to answer. The child had a headache. Nothing serious. Just enough to warrant a call. They could stay, or he could come get them. He said he would be there. He returned to his desk and began closing things out. He sent an email he had planned to write later. He postponed a meeting without explanation. His supervisor watched from across the room, but said nothing. When he stood to leave, someone asked if everything was okay. He said yes. The word came easily. He believed it meant something practical, not emotional. The drive to the school felt different this time. He checked the clock more than once. When he arrived, the child was sitting on a bench outside the office, holding their bag in their lap. They looked smaller than he remembered. The nurse gave him a brief update. He listened closely, asked the right questions, thanked her. He took the child's hand as they walked to the car. The child did not pull away. At home, he set the child up on the couch with water and a blanket. He turned on the television but kept the volume low. He watched from the kitchen while reheating soup. This was manageable, he thought, a temporary adjustment. He returned emails while the soup cooled. He responded to one too quickly, then reread it and felt a flicker of irritation at himself. He preferred control. He preferred clarity. Later, while the child slept, he opened his laptop at the dining table. The chair across from him stayed empty. He noticed that, without wanting to, an email came in from his supervisor. It was polite, supportive, non-committal. It mentioned flexibility, but not indefinitely. It mentioned understanding, but not accommodation. He read it twice, then once more. He understood what it meant. At work, authority came with expectations. Reliability was a currency. He had spent years building it. He assumed it would hold under strain. Now, he saw the limits of that assumption. He closed the laptop and stood up. The apartment felt too quiet again. He checked on the child, adjusted the blanket when it slipped. The child stirred but did not wake. Standing there, he realized something he had not allowed himself to consider yet. The roles he knew how to perform, the competent manager, the steady presence, were built for environments that responded to structure. This one did not. Parenthood, he had learned, could be shared. Authority could be divided. Absence could be absorbed by someone else stepping in. Now, there was no one else. He returned to the living room and sat in the chair facing the couch. He did not open the laptop again. He watched the child breathe, slow and even, and tried to understand what kind of role would be required of him now. The one he had mastered was no longer enough. He would still show up. He would still take responsibility. But the shape of it was already changing, even if he didn't yet know how to name it. The realization stayed with him as evening settled in, quiet and unresolved, waiting for the next demand. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. He knew about it days in advance. He had prepared notes, flagged concerns, reviewed timelines. It was the kind of meeting he usually led. That morning, the child woke with a fever. Not high enough to panic, high enough to matter. He checked the thermometer twice, gave medicine, kept them home from school. He sent an email to his supervisor explaining the delay. The reply came quickly. Understanding. Appreciated. The meeting would proceed as planned. He set the child up on the couch with a blanket and water. He positioned his laptop on the dining table where he could see them without turning his head. The child dozed on and off, waking just enough to sip water or ask for nothing in particular. The meeting started on time. Faces filled the screen. Familiar voices took turns speaking. He followed along, added comments when needed, muted himself when the child coughed. The discussion moved toward a decision point, one that required his sign-off. As the conversation narrowed, the child shifted on the couch. Their breathing changed. They sat up slowly, looking unsteady. He glanced over, asked if they were okay. "I feel weird," the child said. He muted the call and went to them. He knelt down, placed a hand on their forehead, warmer than before. Their eyes looked unfocused. He looked back at the screen. Someone was waiting for his response. He unmuted, said he needed a minute. The silence on the call stretched. He stood up, lifted the child, carried them to the bathroom. They leaned heavily against him. He set them down carefully and waited while they retched. Nothing came up, just the sound. When he returned to the screen, the meeting had moved on. Another voice filled the space he usually occupied. A decision was being discussed without him. He watched, listening, aware of what this meant. He could reassert himself, step back in, reclaim the role he knew, or he could let it pass. The child sat on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, eyes closed. Their breathing was uneven. He did not announce his choice. He simply stayed muted. When the meeting ended, a summary email followed. It thanked everyone for their input. It listed next steps. His name appeared once, under acknowledgments. He read it without reacting. Later that afternoon, he took the child to the clinic. The diagnosis was mild. A virus, rest and fluids, nothing serious. The doctor spoke to him kindly, as if kindness could offset the weight of the day. Back home, he put the child to bed early. He sat at the edge of the mattress until they fell asleep. The room smelled faintly of medicine and clean sheets. In the kitchen, his phone buzzed. A message from his supervisor asked if everything was okay. He typed a response, erased it, typed another. He settled on something brief, honest but not explanatory. The reply came hours later. It acknowledged the situation. It also mentioned coverage plans, contingencies, temporary reassignment. He read between the lines. He did not argue. This was the moment things narrowed. Not because he failed, not because he chose poorly, but because circumstances did not allow for half-presence. That night, he stood at the sink, washing dishes that had barely been used. The water ran hot. Steam rose and disappeared. He focused on the motion, the repetition. He thought about what he had always believed, that commitment could be divided, that roles could coexist if managed well. The day had shown him otherwise. There would be no clean balance, no version of this where he held everything as it was and added something new on top. Something would have to give. He turned off the water and stood there, hands dripping, aware that this choice made quietly, without witnesses, would not be reversible. The consequences had already begun, and they would not announce themselves again. The days after that blurred together without fully disappearing. He woke early. He went to bed late. In between, he did what needed to be done, then moved on to the next thing before thinking too hard about whether it had been done well. Mornings became quieter. No overlapping conversations, no negotiation over time. He set alarms. He packed lunches. He checked folders twice. The child moved to the routine without resistance, which unsettled him more than defiance would have. At work, he was still present, but less visible. He joined meetings instead of leading them. He answered questions without adding commentary. When decisions were made, they happened around him rather than through him. No one said anything unkind. No one needed to. In the evenings, the apartment filled with small evidence of strain. Laundry piled up faster than he could manage. Meals grew simpler. Sometimes they ate standing at the counter because sitting down felt like another task. He noticed the silence most after the child went to bed. It stretched out, unbroken. He filled it with noise when he could the dishwasher. The television left on low, but it always returned. Fatigue changed his sense of time. An hour felt like minutes. A week passed before he realized it had begun. He missed a deadline at work. Not catastrophically, but noticeably. The follow-up email was polite. It asked if everything was still manageable. He stared at the screen longer than necessary before replying yes. The child adapted faster than he did. They learned where things were kept. They stopped asking certain questions. When he forgot something, a permission slip, a snack, they accepted the apology without comment. That acceptance weighed on him. One night, while he folded laundry on the couch, the child sat on the floor sorting crayons into uneven piles. He watched without intervening. He was tired of correcting things that did not matter. The child held up a crayon, broken in half. "Is this still okay to use?" they asked. He looked at it, thought about how small the question was. "Yes," he said, "it still works." The child nodded and added it to the pile without fixing it. Later that same night, after the lights were off and the apartment had settled, the child spoke again from their room. Their voice was calm, almost casual. "You don't have to be good at this right away," they said. He froze in the hallway. The words were simple, not comforting, not dramatic, just stated as if they were obvious. He did not answer. He stood there for a moment, hand resting against the wall, then walked back to the living room and sat down. He stayed there long after the lights in the apartment building across from them went out. From that night on, something shifted. Not in how he felt, but in how he moved. He stopped apologizing for every small mistake. He stopped explaining delays that no one had asked him to explain. When he forgot something, he corrected it and moved on. At work, he declined an additional responsibility without justification. The silence on the other end of the call was brief but noticeable. The task was reassigned. He was not asked again. At home, he began sitting on the floor more often. It put him closer to the child's level. It slowed him down. He listened instead of waiting for his turn to speak. The grief did not ease. It stayed present, steady, like background noise. But it no longer demanded all of his attention at once. He carried it the way he carried fatigue, acknowledged, managed, never gone. There were still nights when he lay awake, replaying decisions he could not revise. There were still moments when he reached for his phone, then remembered there was no one to update. But there were also small adjustments that held. The child laughed more easily than he expected. They complained when dinner was late. They left their shoes in the hallway without asking permission. Ordinary behavior returned in pieces. One afternoon, his supervisor asked if he had considered taking extended leave. The tone was neutral. The implication was not. He said no. After the call, he sat in his car longer than usual before driving home. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel, not in despair, just in pause. The cost of staying present was becoming visible. The cost of stepping back would be visible too. That balance, if it could still be called that, had not settled yet. It wavered, uncertain, waiting for the next decision that would make it real. Nothing was resolved, but nothing was falling apart either. For now, that was enough to keep going. He stopped trying to return things to how they had been. The realization came without ceremony. One morning, while searching for a clean shirt he hadn't had time to wash, he stood in front of the closet longer than necessary. He chose a wrinkled one and put it on without smoothing it out. The world did not respond. Nothing corrected itself. That afternoon he called the school to ask about aftercare options. His voice stayed even. He did not apologize for asking late in the year. He wrote down the details and followed through. He asked for help once. Just once. A neighbor he barely knew agreed to watch the child for an hour on Thursdays. He did not explain the backstory. He simply said thank you. At work, he spoke less and listened more. When a project shifted directions without his input, he accepted it. He redirected his energy toward the tasks he could finish within the hours he had. The grief changed shape again. It no longer surged at unexpected moments. Instead, it sat beneath everything, steady and unmovable. He stopped bracing for it and started accommodating it. One evening, he sat on the floor with the child while they worked on homework. The problems were simple. He waited while the child thought through each one. He resisted the urge to correct too quickly. When the child finished, they looked up at him. "Did I do it right?" they asked. He checked the page. A few answers were wrong. "Yes," he said. "You worked through it." The child accepted that and closed the book. That was new. The apartment reflected the change. It was neither tidy nor chaotic. It was functional. There were notes taped to the fridge, shoes by the door, a calendar with crossed-out days. He noticed absences more clearly now. The empty chair at the table, the side of the bed that stayed cool. He did not avoid those details. He let them exist without filling them. At work, his supervisor called him into a private office. The conversation was brief, polite. The company needed someone fully available in his role. They were offering alternatives. He listened without interruption. When it was his turn to speak, he did not argue. He asked about timelines, about expectations, about what would happen if he declined. The answers were clear. He walked out of the office with a folder in his hand and no immediate plan. That evening, he cooked dinner instead of reheating leftovers. The child helped stir. They spilled some on the counter and laughed when he handed them a towel without comment. While they ate, the child talked about school, about a classmate who had moved away, about how the teacher had rearranged the desks. "They put me near the window now," the child said. "I can see the trees." He nodded. He pictured it without asking for more. Later, after the dishes were done, he sat alone at the table with the folder open in front of him. The options were practical: reduced responsibility, adjusted title, lower pay. None of it felt like punishment. None of it felt like rescue. He closed the folder and left it there. Before bed, he checked on the child. They were already asleep, one arm thrown over the pillow, breathing slow and even. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, aware that the next decision would not be about fixing anything. It would be about choosing what could be carried and what would have to be set down. The understanding did not bring relief. It brought clarity. That would have to be enough. The decision did not come all at once. It arrived in pieces, spread across ordinary moments. He declined the promotion first. The email was brief, appreciative, final. The response came back just as brief. Understood, disappointing, but understood. A week later, he accepted the revised role. Fewer people reported to him. Fewer meetings filled his calendar. The title changed in a way that sounded smaller when spoken aloud. He did not correct anyone who noticed. On his last day in the old role, he cleaned out his desk. There was less in it than he expected. A notebook half filled. A pen someone had given him years ago. He packed everything into a single box and carried it to his car without ceremony. No one stopped him. A few people nodded. One person wished him luck. He thanked them and kept moving. The loss was quiet, but it was real. This work had once given him shape. It had told others who he was before he had to explain himself. Now, that explanation would be his responsibility. At home, the child noticed the change before he mentioned it. "You're home early," they said, looking up from the floor where they were building something out of pieces that did not match. "Yes," he said, "I will be now." The child considered this, then nodded, as if adjusting a mental schedule. Later that evening, he told them the truth in simple terms, that his job would be different, that some things would change, that they would still be okay. The child listened without interrupting. "Does that mean you'll come to the school thing?" they asked. "Yes," he said. He meant it. The cost showed up in small ways. The budget tightened. He checked prices instead of grabbing what he needed. He put off repairs that were not urgent. He sold something he had planned to keep. He felt the absence of status more than the absence of money. People asked fewer questions. They sought his opinion less often. When meetings ended, they continued without him. He let that happen. In the evenings, he helped with homework at the kitchen table. He attended school events and sat in folding chairs that creaked under his weight. He clapped when everyone else did. He stayed until the end. One afternoon, while waiting outside the classroom, he overheard two other parents talking about work, promotions, deadlines, travel. He did not join in. He did not feel excluded. He felt finished. The child came out smiling, holding a piece of paper covered in uneven writing. "Can we put this on the fridge?" they asked. "Yes," he said. They stood together in the kitchen, smoothing the paper flat with magnets that did not quite hold. It tilted slightly to one side. He left it that way. That night, after the child went to bed, he sat alone in the living room. The television stayed off. He thought about the version of himself who would have resisted this outcome, who would have searched for compromise until there was nothing left to trade. He understood that version now. He did not judge him. The sacrifice had been made. Not heroically, not publicly, just enough to change the shape of his days. Tomorrow would not reward him for it. Neither would the next day. But the cost had bought him something he could not replace. Time. And for the first time since the night everything shifted. That felt like a fair exchange. The feeling did not last. It did not need to. The choice had already been made, and it would hold whether he felt certain or not. The morning settled into a new rhythm. He woke later now, not because he needed the sleep, but because there was no reason to arrive early anymore. The alarm went off once. He turned it off without hitting snooze. In the kitchen, he made coffee and waited for it to finish before doing anything else. The child came out of their room on their own. Hair still uneven, socks still mismatched. Some habits had survived the change. They ate breakfast together at the table. Not rushed, not lingering, just long enough. Outside, the air had started to cool. He walked the child to school again, like he had on that first morning. This time, he did not hesitate at the door. The child went inside and looked back once, lifting a hand in a small wave. He returned it and turned away. At work, his desk had been moved, closer to the window, further from the center of things. He noticed the difference and sat down anyway. The work in front of him was clear and contained. He completed it without distraction. When he finished, there was no next task waiting. He went home on time. In the apartment, the light came on in the living room and stayed on. He did not limit it anymore. The space looked different in full light. More worn, more used. He started dinner before the child arrived. Nothing elaborate, just something warm. When the child came through the door, they dropped their bag where it landed and went straight to the kitchen. "Smells good," they said. He nodded, stirred the pot once more and turned the heat down. They ate together without the television on. The child talked about school, about the window seat, about a classmate who asked to borrow a pencil and didn't give it back. He listened. He did not rush the conversation toward a lesson. Afterward, they washed dishes side by side. The child splashed water onto the counter. He handed them a towel. Neither of them commented. Later the child sat on the floor with their homework while he read through mail at the table. Bills, notices, things that required attention but not urgency. He sorted them into small piles and left them there. The apartment grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It did not feel empty. It felt occupied. Before bed, the child asked him to sit for a minute. He did. They did not speak. They just shared the space until the moment passed. When he stood to leave, the child spoke once more. "You're not leaving tomorrow, right?" "No," he said. "I'll be here." The child nodded, satisfied, and rolled onto their side. He turned off the light and closed the door partway, leaving it open just enough. In the living room, he sat in the chair facing the window. The street outside looked the same as it always had. Cars passed. Someone walked a dog. A light flickered on across the way. The world had not changed for them. Inside the apartment, though, something had shifted and held. The absence was still there. It always would be, but it no longer defined the space on its own. He thought about the life he had expected to live, about the roles he had assumed would remain intact. They felt distant now, not lost, just finished. He did not feel proud. He did not feel settled. He felt present. The next morning would come. It would ask for the same things as the one before it. He would answer in the same way. That was the change. Not dramatic, not complete, just real.